Also in the late 1980s, about this time, the time of the formation of the New Lutheran Church, which came into being in 1988, that there was going to be a new Lutheran magazine that would represent these church bodies coming together. It would be called The Lutheran. I was asked to write a column for The Lutheran called, well, they didn't know what it'd be called yet, but it'd be an opportunity for people to ask their questions and for me to answer them. I had, of course, been reading Sidney Harris as a child, so to become a columnist seemed kind of like a natural progression. But it seemed equally clear to me at that time in our lives that I wanted to suggest that Burton and I write it together as clergy couple. And so I proposed that. I said it would be so much richer because between the two of us we had different abilities and different strengths in Bible, theology, ministry, and so on, and it could be somewhat conversational. So I proposed it to the new editorial team, and they thought about it and called me up a few days later, said, we've thought about it, and no, we don't want that. We want you to write the column. And so then I said, well, then I have to say no. And on the other end of the phone said, well, then you can both do it. They had prepared it that way, that if I said no, that then they would ask both of us. And so I'm so glad that I said no, and I'm so glad that the two of us said yes. So for over 13 years, my husband and I, our heads were equal in the pictures. We made sure that when they took a picture, it wasn't like the man's head is above the female. Burton suggested that we have our heads side by side. And we wrote the column together. So often people said, well, who wrote this? Or we figured out who wrote this. Actually, we would look at all the letters that came in, and we had a pattern over a few months we would have a whole category: worship, church life, church and society, and not just answer only questions on the flag in the church or why there's too much noise in worship. So we had a whole range of questions, and we decide which ones we should answer, and then we would try our hand at writing them. He'd write two, I'd write two, and then we would edit each other. So it really was a collaborative process. And actually, in that way, Burton Everist and Norma Cook Everist did become known because the magazine went into over 1 million homes. And to this day, and now it's been 9 years since we stopped writing this, but at Synod Assembly just a couple of weeks ago, someone said, "Oh, I really like your column in the Lutheran magazine. I always enjoyed reading it." Writing and journalism, of course, have been part of my life since high school, the high school yearbook, but also a number of us in journalism class we were asked to edit a newsletter in which grade school, elementary school teachers shared ideas with each other, and we as high school students would write and edit and produce this newsletter called Sharing. And I think in some ways that idea of sharing and helping other people's voices be known has continued with me in the various newsletters. It's letting the people's voices be heard. That was true when in Detroit after the riots we started having a block club newsletter. And it was also true here at Wartburg when we started a newsletter called the Persistent Voice. Well, actually, I need to go back a little bit before there. About the time of one of the anniversaries, 125th anniversary of Wartburg Seminary, I realized that the history that was being told was pretty much male. And so we decided to gather the stories of all of the women who at that time had been students at Wartburg Seminary. And at that time, there had been 125. And we didn't know, they didn't know each other's, and so we gathered all their stories, had them tell their own, write their own stories, and had their pictures, and came up with the book, and the women came, 100 and more. And then after we finished that, a year or two later, someone said, well, there's still more stories, and so some other women wrote, and still the women come. And after that, someone said, well, now what do we do? And said, then so a woman came to me in the fall of 1989, and she'd been waiting a long time for a call. And she said, we need a newsletter to keep us connected with each other. And she said, the word voice needs to be in it. And she came back the next day and said, persistent voice. It needs to be the persistent voice. And at the same time, a woman came up and said, you know, I have some money I've been given as an honorarium. Could we use it for women? And so there the Spirit moved, and we started this newsletter called The Persistent Voice. And it has been through, well, 20 years, really a chronicle of women's history and their place in the church, working for the full expression of women and women's ministries in the church. And, well, in our mission statement today is really addressing issues of gender and justice across the globe and working towards the full partnership of women and men in ministry. So we've celebrated our 20th anniversary year and now are on the web, and will continue to write as the Spirit moves on the web and have Persistent Voice events.